Thank you. It is wonderful to be here. This is an event that I look forward to, and it is great to be here with all of you today. So I would like to start with how public schools can support heritage languages and heritage language learners. But before that, always to start with a tribal land acknowledgement. We would like to acknowledge the Indigenous people who have stewarded this land since time immemorial and who still inhabit these areas today. I am presenting today from the lands of the Swinomish and Samish tribes, and I honor with gratitude the land and waters themselves and these tribes. And I would just like to invite anyone who feels comfortable or would like to make their own land acknowledgement in the chat as well. So as was stated, I am here from OSPI, and our vision is that all students are prepared for post-secondary pathways, careers, and civic engagement, which is part of why heritage language instruction is so important. Superintendent Reichel has been very vocal about the fact that multilingualism is part of a civically responsible and welcoming and very active state. I also want to highlight the fact that the values that I'll be speaking to today are ensuring equity and focus on the whole child. But it's our equity statement that I think is important as we are talking about heritage languages, because ensuring educational equity requires that education leaders develop an understanding of historical contexts, engage with students, families, and community representatives as partners in decision-making, and actively dismantle systemic barriers. Ooh. Sorry about that. Systemic barriers, replacing them with policies and practices that ensure all students have access to instruction and support that they need to succeed in our schools. And that's really what I want to focus on today. But first, before I begin, I would like to ask for your help. This year, every time I'm with a new group of people and we are discussing heritage languages, I ask those present to create a list of our collective linguistic power. Would you take a moment and use the QR code or a link I'll put in the chat in a minute to get to a poll with one question? What languages can you or do you use in your daily life? And I am just interested to see how many languages we always have available to us. Looks like some folks are putting the languages in the chat and others are able to reach the QR code. Thank you for putting all of your languages, not just one or choosing one. I appreciate that. For myself, the languages that I use at home are a combination of English, Spanish, and Catalan. My husband's native bilingual in Spanish and Catalan. And so we are, he's doing his best to teach me, and I am trying. So school-based language programs, heritage language programs specifically. We usually hear about community programs or higher education. So this is a great chance to look at some of the differences for secondary and elementary programs. Before I talk about how public schools can support heritage languages and heritage language learners, it's important to know what I mean when I say heritage language. This is the definition that I use in my work. Heritage languages are minority languages learned in a bilingual or multilingual environment. They include languages in diaspora, used by immigrants and their children, Aboriginal or Indigenous languages, and historical minority languages that coexist with other standard languages. Heritage languages are precious linguistic, cultural, and personal resources for individuals and society. I'd like to focus on one piece of this definition. Heritage languages are learned in a multilingual environment. There's a lot of strength in that statement, in that word multilingual. But for school-based programs, how can we better understand the idea of a multilingual environment? First, we will have to accept that all schools are multilingual environments and much more linguistically diverse than they first appear. It's easy to see that languages of the school, they are on signs and spoken by the adults. If we recognize that translation and interpretation provide access to those languages rather than adding to them, the list is most often 1 or 2 languages. But in middle and high schools, we find multiple languages of instruction when we add the vitally important world language classes and the languages used in them. Our school communities are also getting better at recognizing when there are large groups of students who use an additional language. But what if we started in the other direction and asked about student and community languages first? Then how many languages are in our school? We tend to say about 230. Unfortunately, linguistic isolation is very real, and the number of languages in our public schools can change when one family moves. So we tend to round down and say there are about 230. There is an asterisk next to an unfortunate unknown that I have left on the list. It's a reminder that there is still work to do in accurately reflecting student assets and experience in our data. And one recent improvement that we're making is to the home language survey, which is where this list comes from. It's now written and formatted to help families list all of the languages a student knows or understands rather than feeling forced to pick one. And as we are rolling out that improvement, we're also helping people to know how to add languages to this list so we don't end up with unknowns. I do think it's very important, however, to acknowledge that we do not have data for our educators. We do not know how many languages our educators bring to our school communities. It's something we're working on, but it is definitely something we need to work on. So back to that definition. Heritage languages are learned in a multilingual environment. When I introduce myself professionally, it is with my title, Dual Language Program Supervisor, and the work that I do. I support heritage and dual language programs in Washington State. In Washington, dual language education includes heritage language education, which provides opportunities for students to learn the language of their culture, of their families and communities. This distinction is important. I'm sorry, I'm having some computer problems. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. Okay, I'm hoping we're back to the slides. So the distinction that heritage language falls under dual language is important because as a former dual language teacher, my training is in designing opportunities that facilitate grade level and above development of more than one language. It is also inclusive of training in how to meet the needs of students with whom I do not share a language. But the most important thing that dual language training does is that it helps us to know how to serve students with whom we do not share a common language and whose individual needs are served through an IEP or 504 plan, students who have differences or disabilities in those multiple languages. And that allows us to design from a perspective of default multilingualism. which unfortunately is not the case in many other parts of K-12 education. So I'd like to challenge us today, as we are learning from our colleagues and from the research and experiences that they are sharing, to shift our thinking from how can heritage languages and heritage language learners fit into systems that were not designed for them, but to how can we actively dismantle systemic barriers and replace them with policies and practices that ensure all students have access to the instruction and support that they need to succeed in our schools. So what are heritage language programs? School-based heritage language programs are a path to multiliteracy for Washington students. They are also one of the paths to dual language programs for schools. They are based in identity-affirming, equity-based instruction, and they are different from other forms of language teaching. They support the academic and linguistic development of multilingual learners. But they are not one size fits all. They are not only available to a certain age student, and they are not instead of English language development for multilingual learners. That is something that's been new for folks. The idea that they are not instead of English language development, but are paired. There is also one very important distinction that I would like to address. Even though the majority of definitions and discussions of heritage languages include Indigenous languages, in Washington State, heritage language programs are different from tribal language programs. It is not a matter of linguistics, it is a matter of sovereignty. So we have 4 types of language programs. We have world language programs, where we provide instruction to a language that is new to enrolled students. We have dual language programs that teach subject matter in both English and a partner language that is used by students in the local community. Those programs are long-term and designed for multilingual learners. They might be one way, they might be two-way. Heritage language programs are where students are developing language and culture of their families and communities, as was stated before, and the enrolled students have a connection to the language prior to the program, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a second. But again, those tribal language programs are a different thing. And we're lucky we have that distinction, because that distinction between heritage and tribal languages enables the respect of sovereignty and progress. In 2021-2022, Washington Public School students took classes in 17 tribal languages. In addition to that, they also studied 1 Indigenous language from Oaxaca, 21 non-tribal languages, 1 of which is signed and 3 of which are considered classical languages, within or beyond the school day. That ratio is wonderful. That means that our resources and our schools are supporting the efforts of our tribes to do what they need to do to grow their languages and support. I see a question in the chat about which school is offering Indigenous language from Oaxaca. There is an elementary heritage language program in Mount Vernon Public Schools for Mixteco. It is in the process of being rolled up, which is what we call when you grow to the next level or at a grade level. And I'm hoping that one thing that the distinction between tribal language and heritage language programs does is it also helps me to help others add to that list. It makes it so we can have an infrastructure that is separate for those that do not reside in the territories that would be the land from which their language comes. And so that distinction not only helps the success of our students in engaging in their languages when they are tribal language users or speakers, but also in helping us to support Indigenous languages from outside of the territory we now call the United States. And I am using the language that my colleague, Kyla Gayet, uses. She is our tribal language liaison. And one of the things I find so rewarding in my work is that we have regular collaboration. And so she is helping me to learn more about tribal language programs, and we are working together to help that distinction be supported and both sides grow stronger. The ultimate goal is that heritage language programs are designed for people, not textbooks. School-based heritage language programs must be designed for the people. And so we've started to talk about what types of descriptions might be useful in designing those programs. We have our heritage speakers and signers who have acquired their heritage language skills in their home or community. They've always been in a multilingual environment, but they've most likely experienced subtractive bilingualism. And this is a really important description when we're working with secondary programs. And then there's the heritage language learners who are trying to regain or improve their understanding and use of a heritage language through formal study or in the classroom. And you'll hear me refer to multilingual heritage language learners. This is a parallel term to multilingual English language learners. And it is an attempt to value and make visible that our multilingual students really need to be supported to learn all of their languages. Those two groups are different from our heritage motivated students who have a cultural connection to the language, but have not had the opportunity to acquire the language in the home. In the classroom, heritage motivated students may have extensive knowledge of the social expectations and cultural dimension of the language, but begin learning the language in a classroom setting. Heritage motivation is an essential aspect of language revitalization. It is also what makes it difficult when we have multiple levels of students if we don't have structures in place that understand and support these different types of connection to a heritage language. There are so many benefits to including heritage language programs in public schools. For students, the visibility and the voice is, yes, is like no other. There's also a connection to family, community, and personal heritage for the student. I love hearing when students or teachers share stories that students have shared with them of the time they were able to call their grandmother or their grandfather and have a full conversation without feeling judged, without feeling like they couldn't share or celebrate with that family member. They also create an increased sense of belonging in our schools. We know that that's necessary. It's vital for school success. That academic achievement across languages is really part of development of academic identity. You can't have an academic identity if your whole self is not welcome in the school. But you can grow and develop your academic identity as you develop your full linguistic academic identity as well. Of course, stronger literacy and oracy, opportunities for advanced and dual credit. These are systems that are, these programs are actually considered school-wide reforms because they change the balance of who receives access and has opportunities for advanced and dual credit, who receives and is offered opportunities for seals of biliteracy, not just one, multiple seals of biliteracy, and the college and career activities that they will have in all of their languages. But those of us who are heritage language educators frequently need to be able to talk to district personnel about why they would want this. And so one essential piece of school-based heritage language programs is that we have to be able to walk both sides. What is happening for students, but also what is happening for our buildings or for our districts. Create stronger connections to just like for students. It also offers us the opportunity to increase the number of multilingual educators in the district as a whole. These programs are able to shift the balance of educators. How many years has it been that 80%, somewhere around 80% of all K-12 educators were white women who were predominantly monolingual English speakers? This changes that. We also have a way to shift the way we think of school reform and school improvements. I'll talk a little bit about that later. But the most important thing is that primary language development and support for students who speak languages in addition to the language of instruction see success. Success that they do not see without those opportunities. So I'm going to kind of boil it down to three things. Public schools can support heritage language and language learners by recognizing that heritage language users and signers and learners are multilingual first. They can make visible the full range of languages in the school community, and they can break down systemic barriers for multilingual heritage learners by designing programs for them rather than finding ways they can fit in monolingual or additional language acquisition settings. But I would like to know from our community, what barriers and benefits do we see to K-12 public school programs? If you were a heritage language learner or a heritage language speaker or user who attended public schools, what barriers did you face? What did you experience? What did you witness? If you are an educator working with students in a K-12 setting, what are the barriers you wish you could remove? But also, what are the benefits? What benefits do school-based heritage language programs bring to communities, language learners, schools, and systems? And I'd like to pause for a minute because knowing how we think about these things as a community is important. And it's important to the work that we do at the state, and it's important to the support we provide. So if we could take 2 minutes, and there is a QR code, and there is also a link that this time I'll try to get into the chat. What benefits and barriers are there? Asset view, I love that. We have to have that asset view. Yes, I am going to guess that staffing, finding time, and curriculum is a barrier. Mix of levels is honestly from the classroom all the way through to my position now at the state. This is one of the most difficult things. Yes, teacher preparation. Martha, I see your comment in the chat. Everyone seems to be an expert on what you as a heritage language learner know, or as a heritage language user know, and what you are like. It's incredibly disorienting. Thank you for sharing that. When your voice is not elicited on your identity and your abilities, and those funds of knowledge are not accessed, that's why we don't see. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Colonial view of education. Yes, that is a barrier that we must address. Give about 30 more seconds. And this link will remain open. Please do continue to share barriers and benefits that you see. Not a priority, yeah. unfortunately, but that's changing. So my work is in supporting heritage language educators, schools, and districts, and I'd like to share a little bit about what we're working on at OSPI. One of the things we do at OSPI is create guidance. Another is offer technical support. I started my position at OSPI on July 1st of 2022. I am, as far as I know, the first person to work there that is specifically charged with working with heritage language programs, who has experience with the programs as well. As educators began to reach out and I learned more about the state of heritage language programs in our public schools, it became clear that there is a need for heritage language specific guidance, materials, and support. And the first heritage language specific guidance that we were able to offer was a framework for starting a school-based program. But that's a lot of steps. There were a lot of little dots on that arrow. And so to support the state superintendent's vision for a multilingual and multiliterate Washington, one of the things that we are doing is working to help schools and districts move to a linguistic justice informed process that begins with human connection, rather than seeing the development of a heritage language program as a course to add or check boxes on a list. We start with connection. And we cannot begin a program until we have made connections. We also are working to frame program development with questions rather than answers. If we are going to have culturally and linguistically sustaining programs, we must have culturally and linguistically sustaining program development. And so guiding questions are a way to make sure that we are looking for what fits our community as members of that community, rather than doing what's said in the chat, assuming we know. We cannot assume we know, but we can be partners in this work. Also looking at the guidance and support we can provide to think of the heritage language program cycle. After we've got a program designed and we are engaging students in learning opportunities, we must continually review student progress and celebrate that learning. But we're going to have to identify strengths and opportunities, because as these programs get going, even after 1 year, the amount of untapped capacity magnifies our ability to know and listen to what our students are telling us they need and can do. It's incredible. But that means we need to think of this as a cycle. We can't just one and done. And so part of our work at the state level is to help go from research to evidence-based practice. I get asked questions like, what standards do I use in heritage language courses? I need to know, and we need to know the research that you're doing on grammar, on language acquisition, on the way language functions, to be able to make decisions on how to answer that question. Is there a placement test I can use? I get asked that all the time. What textbooks should we buy if you have money to buy textbooks? Do you have a list of books that would be good for a classroom or a school library? If heritage language programs are under the umbrella of dual language programs, should I use the 3 or 4 pillars? The 4th pillar, of course, being critical consciousness, and I would say yes. And the ever-present question, who is doing this well? Is there somewhere I can visit? And that's why we are making improvements in the way we collect data. One of my favorite moments in last year's symposium was listening to what we don't know. And when I heard that, I was working in a school district, and now I'm working at the state, and I can help in the process and to share the progress we are making as a state to better improve the data we collect. As I mentioned before, we've already made improvements to the home language survey, which is how we know what students use as languages outside of the school, but we're also doing other things like finding ways to code classes so we know how long students are participating, not just in dual language programs, but in heritage language programs. What languages of instruction are being used in content areas outside of the traditional world language classrooms of language for language speakers. And so these are improvements we're working on in data, and we need to know what data we need. We're also working on ways to make materials available and affordable. The Washington OER Hub I'm reopening the sections for heritage and dual language. This is a way for us to help districts that do not have perhaps the funds, and also to recognize the fact that no textbook is exactly what we need. Could be part of what we need, but it's not exactly what we need. And so this is a way for us to collaborate as a community on those materials that do work, that are authentic, that are rigorous, and that do include multiple representations. One of the things this also allows us to do is to highlight the educators and organizations which are proving their curriculum works, that are proving that authentic materials are available in all languages. And none of it can happen if we're not also working on inclusionary practices. UDL is not just a way to teach disability. That is a misrepresentation. UDL is a way to hold high expectations for all students in all content areas because they can achieve more than we could ever dream for them. And so when I'm supporting educators, or when we as state folks are trying to help educators learn how to support heritage learners, we are talking about engaging all learners. And how do we accelerate learning through the things that have been learned in other areas of K-12 education? One of my favorite examples of this is that I don't know if any of the other Spanish teachers out here have a love-hate relationship with teaching accents, but I do because I taught middle and high school. And so I basically 10 years in decided I was going to teach typing instead and leverage muscle memory to help students feel in their hands the accent that they hear and that they feel in their tongue. There are ways we can leverage instructional methods that we might not know of. And I want to know what other people do because there are all these little tricks. A lot of our work is also, we help lift up programs. We do have school-based heritage language seed grants. I cannot give you very much information about those right now because House Bill 1228 is in the education committee. So we are hoping to have more resources available, but I will say that these grants allow us to support programs that are ready to benefit. At the moment, they are competitive grants, but one of the things we do look for is how can we support less commonly taught languages in ways that will support the whole state. And we're going to hear a little more about this because the leaders of this program are here today. But one of the lighthouse programs that we have is the statewide virtual heritage language program. Some highlights from their program from the state level is that they are an exemplar of community organization public school partnership. Public school heritage language programs do not compete with community-based programs or community-based organizations. We collaborate because we are part of the same communities. We use these languages together, but we might serve slightly different goals for an overall vision of maintaining and strengthening our multilingual communities. We also see in this program systemic supports for multilingual heritage learners that respond instantly. And that is something that we have to replicate throughout school-based programs. And I have really been excited to learn more as student leadership and club activities have been integrated into this program. And, everyone loves numbers. Seal of iLiteracy. More languages are being tested because of this program. In the brick and mortar programs, a lighthouse program that I'd like to mention is Bellevue School District's Heritage Language Project. And so it is not just the virtual programs that can have that flexibility. Some highlights on this project is that support for the project is housed within the multilingual learner structures, including a district level coordinator. Systemic supports for multilingual and heritage learners are being made to respond to district, but also community identified strengths and opportunities. And there's a demonstrated commitment to students' community and languages by placing instruction, even at the elementary school level, in the school day. In one aspect of this project is the Arabic language program, and community has been intentionally and meaningfully listened to for the need for the program, and then asked for continual input on program vision and design, and are being invited in for continuing opportunities for family and community involvement as the program moves forward. There's a leadership team that's across departments, allowing for the access to programs that sometimes get left off, like highly capable services or educational technology, in case a student or a family would prefer to be learning in a virtual environment but connected to a district. And just as a highlight, 126 kindergartners have been accepted to the Arabic language program for next year, 90 of whom are from the Bellevue community, because Bellevue community was prioritized, and the others asking for permission to join from the larger metropolitan area. Pipeline, big concern for us. People might not know. Not only language funds go towards language teachers, so that's something that we're working on as a state, how to help folks know that if you're going to teach college in the high school heritage language class, then Title II can help you pay for your master's in the language so that you can meet the requirements of the university with whom you are partnering. And I think I am running out of time, so I will just say that focusing on the types of instruction to include stories and storytelling is something that I really enjoy, because we're helping students to recognize themselves and be seen as experts in their own experience. It's something that is vital for heritage language programs. These are also ways that we can provide opportunities for older students to work with younger students without making them the tutor that limits their own progress. And these are some of the other teaching strategies that we are working on professional development at the state level in order to help support, particularly for our world language colleagues who are a vital workforce of multilingual teachers, but have not necessarily had the opportunity to engage in heritage language or dual language methodology, including learning supports. That expert learning is so important, that cross-linguistic connection where we can value language variation explicitly throughout the day. So there's really 4 ways that our work at the state tries to support heritage languages and language learners. We try to consistently and meaningfully engage with students, families, and the community through planning and program development, and to insist and support districts and schools and teachers to do the same. We ask questions to identify the ways of knowing, being, and learning that will form the roots of successful and sustainable programs, while protecting the language and any community leaders or elders who contribute to the program. This is something we are learning how to do from Indigenous language programs. And we are including support for educators in program planning, both as we are working to strengthen the supports we have at the state level and as we are helping districts and buildings to create and strengthen their own programs, and committing to cycles just the same as our districts need to. We have to continually improve our programs as well. This is my contact information. I am a public employee and I am part of this community. And so I hope you will contact me if you would like to collaborate, have questions, or have things I should know. If there are ways that I can support you, I do hope you will contact me. And thank you very much. See, it looks like we've got some questions in the chat. So a state program for teachers at the universities that prepare them to teach heritage language programs. I would like to say that the bilingual endorsement is not just for dual language teachers. Bilingual endorsement, again, just as heritage language programs fall under dual language, bilingual teaching endorsement will train teachers in what they need for heritage language methodology at the K-12 level. It is a certificate that is technically available in every language, but myself and Dr. Veronica Jarpani, my colleague in world language, are finding that there are ways that that is limited. For example, there is a program wanting to teach Sanskrit, and we don't have an approved educator test for Sanskrit, so we have things to fix. But bilingual endorsements are definitely that, and there are teacher educators here today who I'm sure will speak about other programs that support the development of heritage language educators.
Thank you so much, Emma. I think we can take a few more questions at the tail end of the session, but it's probably time to bring in Ileana Marin for the next section. She'll have a very brief presentation that really connects to the work that you guys are doing at the state level at OSPI with the community-based language schools.
Good morning, Steph. I might go ahead and just wait one more minute to see if people are returning from a break.
Sure, thank you, Emily.
Shall I leave my my mic on, or just do it when it's my part?
I think it's up to you. You're welcome to turn it off and on, and we'll remind you if you happen to skip it.
I'll leave it on for our presentation.
Okay, that works. And oh, there we go. Now we can see you too. Excellent.
And I might share my screen in the meantime.
Great.
Great. Okay.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and do a short introduction. We are shifting now to the research-focused portion of the presentations today, and we will be hearing about present tense morphology in Spanish heritage and second language children by our research team, Ana Fernandez Bilbao, who is not here. She is on sabbatical in Spain, and Julia Hershenson, Professor Emerita, and Stefana Vukadinovic. Did I get that right, Stefana?
Yeah, it's Stefana Vukadinovic.
Vukadinovic. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Thanks for joining us today. We are going to present, as Emmy said, this project on present tense morphology in Spanish heritage language and second language children. It's our project in progress, and Anna is actually right now collecting additional data for this very project. And Julia will start with some background information, why we are studying this, and research questions. So please, Julia, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Steph. So as Steph mentioned, we're talking today about research we collected in the Seattle Public School dual language immersion or DLI programs, where we were looking at both heritage language children whose first language from infancy was Spanish, and the children who were second language learners beginning in kindergarten. So we were looking at fourth graders. We'll give you a little bit more of that in just a minute. So heritage children who are not in a dual environment, that is, who aren't exposed to academic Spanish, if you want, have been shown to have some attrition of their skills in their first language because they don't have enough exposure. We also have noted for both adults and children that there is a difficulty for second language learners using verbal morphology. But most of the earlier research on both heritage and second language have been studies of adults. So turning to our DLI programs here in Seattle, we have a number of programs. We were looking particularly at the ones that had 50-50 Spanish and English half the day in Spanish, half the day in English for content classes. And we had in that program both a heritage language and second language children, as I said. Now, there have been a lot of studies, particularly by Thomas and Collier and Thomas, and many more articles by them and others, showing that these programs across the country are very, very advantageous linguistically, clearly, but also academically, so that by the time children get to be about fourth or fifth grade, they are either at a par or above comparable control groups. As I said, monolingual Spanish learning children first learn third person singular and then the other persons very soon. And it's usually in the second year of life. So they're picking this up very, very quickly. The L2 children that we've looked at in the past, and we've actually published a couple of articles already on this research we've collected and we continue to collect, the L2 children are significantly less accurate in present tense, but they are well above chance. So you'll see that they're getting, say, 80% accuracy, which is really pretty high. And Steph will be telling you more about that. So as I mentioned, also the English dominant environment may impact the children if they do not have a sufficient amount of input in their first language Spanish. So it's important that the heritage children have this input in the academic setting. L2 learners, as I mentioned earlier, have difficulty with verbal inflection, making sure that they can use the correct persons and tense marking for the verbs. So this leads us to our research questions, which are the heritage and second language children in the DLI program we've been looking at, are they comparable to controls who live in a Spanish language environment that is a majority Spanish environment, in using present tense verb morphology in a spontaneous written production task, which is what we are looking at in this particular instance. And if there are differences between any of the pairs, that is L1, HL, and L2, what aspects of the variability might be involved? So Steph is going to now tell you about our study.
Thank you, Julia. So as it was mentioned, we collected data in English-Spanish two-way dual immersion program, and we recruited 77 participants. 21 of them are Spanish heritage language children in the DLI program, 41 Spanish L2 children, and 15 controls, Spanish L1 children born and raised in a Spanish majority setting. They were asked to complete a meaning-focused writing task, a letter, an email to a pen pal. So you can see on the screen the format. So this particular participant wrote to their amigo, to their friend. The topic was hola, and usually the participants would cover such topics as they would describe something about their family members, hobbies, the subjects they like or dislike, their favorite colors, food, and they would ask the same from their pen pal. We analyze subject-verb number agreement accuracy, subject-verb-person agreement accuracy, tense, aspect, mood, and thematic vowel accuracy. What we observe is the present tense morphology reveals high level of subject-verb number agreement accuracy for all three groups, and it's colored in blue, so it's 97% for L1s, 96% for heritage language, and 91% for L2s. Likewise, 10, aspect, and mood and thematic vowel accuracy are high for all three groups, and it's colored in green. L2 children were significantly less accurate for person agreement, scoring at 80%. So they were less accurate than both L1s and heritage language children, but still well above chance. These demonstrate the benefit of the DLI program for heritage language maintenance and L2 acquisition. But if we zoom in and look at stem changing verbs, and stem changing verbs in Spanish would be such as tener, querer, jugar, and to give you an example of the infinitive tener, to have for third person singular, it's tiene. So the stem changes, and it looks like it's more challenging for heritage language children and L2 learners, because while L1s were accurate 98% and are sailing, heritage language children were less accurate, 56%, and L2 children less accurate than L1s and heritage language learners. So our findings demonstrate that heritage language children are comparable to majority controls in mastery of present tense verb morphology in spontaneous written production, a fact that we attribute to the continuing input and literacy training of the DLI environment. L2 children are significantly less accurate than heritage language and L1 children. Still, they show relatively high level of accuracy, well above chance, in all present tense verb inflection measures, which confirm the benefits of the DLI for second language acquisition. Considering the difficulty with stem changing verbs, we'd like to propose a classroom activity that we believe is beneficial for heritage language and L2 students. And using a letter to a pen pal from our study, we'd recommend writing a response to, say, Pablo, using the following verbs: tener, hablar, jugar, pensar. So again, stem changing verbs, and cover the topics that our participants wrote about. This collaborative writing project is going to be beneficial and will focus on the stem changing verbs that participants should use. We suggest having mixed groups of students that are both heritage language and L2 learners, and each group will be given information about a pen pal, and group members will work together to compose a response and focus on this challenging topic that our data demonstrate that heritage language and L2s have some difficulties with. That's our presentation for today. Thank you everyone for joining. These are our references. And as we mentioned at the very beginning, it's a project in progress. And if you're interested in participating in our research, please do reach out. We are seeking collaboration with DLI teachers, and we want to collect more data in the DLI environment. Thank you very much, and we'll be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Julia and Steph. And now it's my honor to introduce the next presenters, who are grad students here at UW, and they're going to be sharing a little bit more about themselves. So here I leave you with Melissa and Anna.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm going to begin my presentation. Just give me a second. I'm getting ready for this. Okay, just a second. Okay, here we go. Welcome everybody to this presentation, Noticiero Latino. I am Ana Maria Ruiz. I'm a predoctoral Spanish instructor at the University in Washington. I'm also a master's student in the College of Education, and I'm very happy, I'm very glad to be here and having the opportunity to share the experience of designing and implementing this activity in my classroom. I'm currently teaching a 300 level class in the Heritage Language Learning Program. So I'm going to talk about this experience in this presentation. Well, here there is an agenda for today. First of all, I'm going to give you a little bit of context about where this activity is coming from. Then I'm going to talk about, I'm going to describe the activity and how to implement it in the classroom. As you will see, I designed this activity for a specific group of students, but I will talk about possible adaptations for different levels. And finally, I will go back to the different ways in which this activity may benefit learners in different ways. Okay, first of all, let's talk about the activity I'm going to talk about makes part of a larger project, a capstone project in which I designed and implemented activities for the 314 course. This is the second in a series of 4 courses in the Heritage Language Program. The main purpose of this course is to help students to expand their linguistic skills while emphasizing on the acquisition of certain norms in reading Spanish, such as punctuation, accent marks, spelling, and specific grammar points. Most of the activities I designed for this capstone project includes the following components: gamification, which is a very helpful resource that help to reduce a students' anxiety, mainly when practicing complex grammar topics. And most of these activities also fosters a student's agency and making decisions when working collaboratively with their classmates. Most of these tasks are authentic and meaningful and content relevant. Okay, going deeper into this activity, the role play, not the Latino role play, its main objectives are past tenses in a meaningful and authentic way, identified and produce sentences in a formal register, engage in collaborative work throughout all the stages of this task, and gain a better understanding of main events happening in Spanish-speaking countries. So a little bit of preparation before beginning this task. I suggest teachers to do some research on online resources or websites, so different resources that students may need while working on this activity, and get prepared to share these resources with the students before beginning the activity. For the grouping, I suggest students to work in a small group. So 3 or 4 students, will be ideal for this activity. Then introduce the goals, the expectations for this activity, and also some guiding questions that would guide this project. Well, in this case, will be what happened during the last month or during the last year in the Spanish-speaking countries. This would be like a good guiding questions in this task. And finally, introduce the task. Okay, this task includes different steps. Let's begin with the first one. In the first step, we're going to ask a student to select a country or geographical area to investigate. The area of this country has to be a Spanish-speaking country. That's the only requirement. And something that I did to make more from this activity is that I start by activating a student's previous knowledge. I ask my students to tell me which countries they know in which Spanish is spoken. I also like to problematize a little bit the idea of a Spanish-speaking country. So I also like to ask my students if whether they consider the United States will be one of these countries or not. So this could begin a very interesting conversation around this topic. So after selecting a country or a geographical area the students want to investigate, some online research. So here we provide students with some resources which help them in this process. And this is a very interesting and important part of this activity, since all students are individually looking for news on the internet or on their devices. And then they need to get into agreement. They need to decide which news they're going to use. So they have to interact a lot. There is a lot of interaction in this part of the project, because the students are reading news, are retelling the news to their classmates, and are trying to convince them about the news they would like to talk about. So there is a lot of interaction again in this stage. After that, it comes the news write-up. This is the time in which students start thinking about what is relevant to tell in their news, what is not. The idea is that the students write a short paragraph using past tenses, because this is one of the main objectives of this activity, that the students can practice past tenses, and also to help students to choose what to include and what to not include in their presentation. I ask them to answer the questions: what, when, why, how, and why. I think I repeat one of this. And then it comes final revision. Students review the final version with the teacher's help. So this is an important stage as well, because this is when I provide my students with some feedback. This activity also gives me useful information about how my students are going with this grammar topic. So I can decide if I need another activity to practice past tenses, or if students are going well and they don't need more activities for practicing this topic. So this gives me a lot of useful information about how my students are going with past tenses. And logistics. So this is a step in which the students are still making decisions about who's going to introduce the Noticiero Latino. How are they going to do this? Is every member of the group going to participate, or are they going to choose a leader and that person will be in charge of sharing the news? Was a name that they want the Noticiero Latino to have. So these are like some important decisions that students need to make before beginning the role play. Then it comes the role play performance, luces, cámara, en acción, and students they start working on this role play. Well, this is the part in which the students are very creative. Sometimes they talk about the weather before introducing the news. Some of my students change their voices and adopt like a more formal register. So in this stage, it's important to motivate students to use all their creativity as much as they can. And then a good closure for this activity would be asking students to give you some feedback about the stages that went well and possible modification or changes. So this includes some questions about which activity did you like the most from this task? What would you do different next time? Which was the most impactful new? So this is a way that students can give you feedback about how did they feel while performing this activity. And possible adaptations to a lower level Spanish class. Well, I would say that in lower level, more scaffolding and time will be needed for this activity. That's why I think it would be a good idea to design a unit based on this task. And that way, the students will have more time to devote to each of the stages, and we could maximize the learning opportunities in each stages. So if we have more time for doing this activity, we can expose the students to news bulletin programs in both languages, Spanish or English. So in this way, they would be more familiarized. They will get more familiar with the kind of language that is used in the news bulletin. We can also provide the students with more practice on reading and summarizing points. They can even improve their reading skills, acquire new reading skills. We can also provide more opportunities to try complex and past sentence structures, so a little bit of time to practice more grammar in class before doing the role play. Practicing and classifying types of news, political, economical, environmental, and any other kinds of news. And we can also let students to choose the kind of news that they would like to investigate. So this is a good way to incorporate a student's interest into this activity. Depending on the kind of news that the students are interested in presenting, we can also review common vocabulary that they are going to need in order to present their news. And finally, teachers and students both consider other ways to report the news, such as writing a newspaper instead of performing a role play, or doing a video recording using a blog, or creating a YouTube channel. So these are some of the ways in which this activity can be adapted to a different level. Okay, lastly, I'm going to talk about some of the benefits of this task, and I'm going to go back to the main components I found really useful when designing materials for heritage classes. Most of these benefits include these components I already talked about. So this activity can encourage a student's decision-making, agency and decision-making. It requires students to practice all 4 linguistic skills throughout the activity. It is an authentic, contextualized, and meaningful way to practice past tenses. It engages students in authentic tasks such as news reading and reporting. It fosters collaborative work and interactions among students, and it allows the students to get informed about main events happening in Spanish-speaking countries. So as I said before, like these are the components that I found that work better in my classroom. I decided a capstone project in which I included all these materials and instruments that I designed and implemented. And I would be glad to share this material if someone is interested in this. So I'm going to leave my contact information here. If someone would like to have access to this folder with materials, do not hesitate to send me an email, and I would be happy to share this material with everyone. Thank you so much for listening, and I think we can have a few minutes for questions. Feel free to ask any question. Okay, thank you, everyone. Yeah.
Can you briefly mention what other activities you have in your capstone?
Yes, what kind of activities? Yeah, I have different kind of activities. I have different word maps. Most of my activities include gamification. So in some of them, I'm using friendly platforms such as quizzes, Kahoots, Genially. Also have task-based activity, which includes all the stages and materials. And yes, I have a full variety of different teaching materials, and I'm sure all teachers can adapt these materials to their classroom. Thank you, everyone. I'll stop sharing screen, and then Melissa will talk about her wonderful project.
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I was wondering about, you mentioned gamification, and I wonder, are you referring to like vocabulary focused games, or more like grammar structure games, or both? And when you're doing that, like, how do you limit the amount of vocabulary that you are exposing the kids to practice? Like, how much do you feel is a reasonable amount to expose them to within one gaming session? And also, how long do you allow the gaming sessions to last to be effective and not take too much time away from doing the more realistic types of things like role plays and things like that? Thank you for your presentation, by the way.
Okay, thank you for your questions. I'll try to answer all of them. I have a bad memory, so maybe I forget some of them. Well, something that I did in my classroom is that I begin all the classes with